So outside of the polygons menu set, there's a few other very useful tools, especially for modeling, such as the surfaces, so for curves and so on. We've also got a couple of things in the animation menu and the rendering menu. So let's just take a look here. The specific things we're going to cover, if I press the spacebar menu, we get access to all of those menus. So we can go down on the animate. We've got our create deformers. Just going to take a look at the lattice and the non-linear deformers. Also we've got things like edit curves, like some of the certain tools like rebuilding the curves and subdividing and extending and so on. We've also got down here on lighting and shading, we've got transfer maps, which is also a pretty crucial thing for baking normal maps and occlusion and things like that. So if we just move over to Blender, we'll just take a look at where some of these are. If I just switch over to this idea here, I'm just going to select that and delete it and grab these, move them to the middle again. So let's just zoom in there. Right, okay, so here we have a monkey head, and we've got this lattice that surrounds it. If we grab the points of the lattice, we can move this around. We can see that taking effect. Basically what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move them out of the way, and we'll just start and build that back up from scratch. So what we can do is just press Shift A to bring up our add menu, add this monkey head here. Just going to press Shift A again and add a lattice. I'm just going to scale that up out so that it comes all the way outside of the, so the monkey head fits completely inside the perimeter of this box. We can press the Control Alt and Q shortcut key to just toggle the quad view. This is also down here as well in the properties sidebar, and we can see that the monkey head fits completely within this. So I'm just going to toggle that back again. Now then, what we need to do is we just need to add this lattice as the driving force of a lattice modifier. So let's just do that now. We can come over to the modifiers tab. We can come over to lattice and then select this lattice here. This is called lattice.001. So if we just go object and lattice.001, we can see this is now all rigged up. So if we just grab that lattice, press tab to enter into its edit mode, we can now just going to border select with the B key those 4 top points and press G to move them around. We can see that's taken effect. In fact, let's just move that right over there, and tab back out into object mode again. The specific information for this lattice can be found in the object data. Here we can see this little lattice icon, in fact, and we can switch the amount of divisions that we have there, and the interpolation type there as well. But pretty much this is your handiest features and area of the settings here. If I just come back to this monkey head again, so we can have a look at the modifier, we've also got this strength slider, which is particularly useful, so we can basically back it off a little bit if need be. That's quite handy. So yeah, really that should just sort of cover the basic elements of the lattice there. So let's just move. I've got another couple of scenes down here in the layers. I'm actually just going to click on the second one just to see this. Here's another deformer. This is the bend deformer at the moment. Just got a simple subdivided, extended and stretched cube, which is now being bent over. This is a typical thing that you might like to do with, well, this is basically what I tend to do with the bend modifiers within Maya. So it's that kind of behavior. Basically, I'm just going to start again, similar as we just did with the lattice. So I'm just going to press A to deselect everything. Let's press Shift A to add in the cube. Now the location of the origin is quite important on this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep the origin where it is and just move the mesh detail by tabbing into edit mode. Just pressing, in fact, let's just bring back the gizmo. I'm just going to press, just make sure we're on incremental snapping. I'm just going to hold Control while I hit this this top blue arm here to move along the Z-axis. Just move it up one, so now it's perfectly on the grid there. but the origin is still down at the bottom there. So I'm just going to tab, in fact, actually we need to do a few other things. Let's grab this top face and just move it straight up. Just going to press Ctrl R and now scroll the wheel to just increase the divisions there, and now press left click to confirm that. Now press tab back out, and that should do it for the this simple cube that we've got, this elongated cube now. What we can do now is we can just go to the modifiers, add in a simple deform, and instantly it takes effect. We can see it's set to twist at the moment. I'm just going to change that to bend. By default it's set at 0.35. I'm just going to make the effect all the way up, and it's got full limits here. Some settings, all settings that you might be well familiar with from Maya. We can see that it's bending not in a particularly desirable way, so the best way to drive this is with an empty. So I'm just going to go Shift A and add an empty, and now that's added an empty right at the bottom there. That's called empty.001. If we come back to the deformer, we can set that as its origin, empty.001. And now what I'm going to need to do is just move this empty around a little bit. We might see some effects taking place. Yeah, it's changing the way that it deforms there. One of the key things that we might need to do on the deform modifier is set this to relative. That will help us for what we're about to do. I'm just going to grab that empty again, move that, see what effects that now makes. We can see it's essentially just stretching that out. The best way to do this, we're essentially not rotated quite right. We actually just need to rotate around the y-axis 90 degrees, and now we get the typical kind of the bend kind of effect that you might be expecting there. Again, if we end up changing this, we essentially are changing the origin of the way where it starts and makes its bending calculations, so bear that in mind. We can also see that that's actually taking effect there if we change the rotation of that as well, so we can get some interesting effects, especially if you start animating these values. That can be pretty handy there. But as I say, there's also these other non-linear type deformers there, the equivalent of Maya at least. So let's take a look at some of the basics of generating and editing curves within Blender. We can see we've got this polygon plane that we're looking down at the moment, because the first method of generating a curve that we'll look over is just converting from already existing mesh detail. So if I just select this plane and then tap into edit mode, just to see the details here that we're looking at and to select one of the edge loops, I could have just gone add mesh and then a grid, I suppose, rather than subdividing this plane, but any method is fine really. If I just Alt right click on one of the edges there just to select its loop, because that's what will convert into a curve. It doesn't matter whether we're in the vertex or edge select mode there, by the way, we can just do it in either, is fine. So if now we just press the P key just to separate this selection into a completely new object, if I tab into object mode there, we can see the original plane we can hide now, and this plane.001 that we've just created from that original selection, we can see is still a mesh data type, because we can see this triangle icon here is the same as the original data from the plane. In fact, we can see in the properties window here, it's the triangle icon as well. And if we tap into edit mode, we can see that it's still exactly the selection that we had from before. It's still subdivided in exactly the same way as the edge loop that we originally selected. But if we just tab back into object mode and then go Alt C and then convert to a curve from a mesh, it's as simple as that. We've just now converted it from a polygon plane to the curve type, and we can see the icon has changed, and again in the properties window, and we get access to all the curve related tools within here now. If I tap into edit mode, we can see we actually get the fins kind of showing us the direction of the curve, but otherwise it all looks very, very similar. In fact, if we actually just select one of them and move them, it's acting very, very similarly to the original polygon plane would have. All we would need to do is just press A to ensure that we've got everything selected. So I needed to press A to deselect and then A to toggle the select of everything at that point. But then all we'd need to do is just click on Set Spline Type, and then it's set to poly at the moment, so we're going to need to change this to a Bezier, or at least we can do if we want to, and that's going to create all these Bezier handles, and it's got all those selected at the moment. So I'm just going to press the V key to just take a look at some of the handle types available to us here. I'm just going to select the vector type, and what that's going to allow us to do is just select on one of these handles on their own, and then just press the G key to just move this around a little bit, and we can see that the interpolation between that point and its previous point, the curve shape is being shown there, and then that's giving us essentially the benefits of it being a curve type. So those are some of the basics, the very fundamentals of the curve really, but I'm just going to delete that for now. We will actually come and return back to some of the options available to us in the properties window with the curve, but that's just the basics there really. Another method we've got to be able to create a curve is if we jump into our top orthographic view with the 7 key on the numpad. And what I can do now is I'm just going to draw a curve into the view. So if I just press the D key and hold that down, and while D is held down, just left click and drag into the view. And then that's going to create this grease pencil layer, which we can see in the properties sidebar here. All we need to do now is just convert into, I'm going to just select a Bezier curve type, and we can see it's created this GP layer now in the outliner. And we can see this original curve, the grease pencil is still in the view as well. I'll just keep that there for now. We could just delete it, but let's just keep it in view and just move it off to the side there with the G key. Just move this whole object to the side. If I tab into edit mode, we can see with this grease pencil layer selected, we can tab into edit mode, and we can see there's a lot of points that it's created. That's perhaps overkill for the actual object that we've just created. The type of curve that we've created is quite easy and quite free flowing. So with all these points, it doesn't make it very easy to edit. So what we can do is we can just simplify this curve by using an add-on. So if we jump into our user preferences, and in particular the add-ons tab, we can search in the filter for simplify, and we can see that it shows up in the add curve section. And then if we just go to search simplify curves within the 3D view, we should be fine here. Just make sure it's enabled, as I say. Press the space bar and then just search for simplify curves, as I've already done in this case, and then just click simplify curves, and then you can see it immediately starts to take effect. We can see that we get this in the toolbox area, the tool shelf. We can just change exactly how much we want to simplify it. The higher the number is, the more ruthless and aggressive the simplification is. But if we just I'm just going to hold shift just to do it slightly until I feel like the general gist of what was drawn with the curve is maintained, and that looks fine to me. I'm now just going to press G to move that out of the way slightly. So now we've got this simplified GP layer that it's created. It's created all these sort of keyframes that we don't really need, but the simplification, because it's duplicated without the keyframe, so I didn't need to delete any of those. But for example, if you did want to delete all those, by the way, we could just go to the dope sheet, for example, just highlight them all, press X to delete. That's fine as well. But in any case, I'm just going to go back to the timeline. We don't really need that one, but with this one, if we tab into edit mode now, we can see there's barely any points there. In fact, we can see it's 24 points, which is totally fine, which means that it's got 8 individual points along the curve, because this is always going to be divisible by 3. This counts in the vert count. This is maybe particularly it might be slightly confusing because it's using vertices, whereas maybe other applications use the terminology points, and that's also meaning that it's including the handles as points as well, or vertices in this case. So that's why we're going to get 8 points along the curve, but really we've got 8 points there, but we've actually got 2 additional ones per point because of the handles, so hence the 24. But otherwise that is very simple and easy to work with at that point. So that's maybe one method of creating a curve which might be useful for us. So if we just delete those, and I'm just going to delete the grease pencil layer as well. The other method, which is perhaps the most intuitive, is just going to the Add menu. I'm just going to go Shift A, and then we've got this curve menu. We've got the Bezier, NURBS, and Path curve types, of which the differences are quite reasonably subtle, but they're actually, we can just find the differences within the curves, the object data. Might have some extra settings within the properties window, so just check them out if we want to get into that in more detail. But I'm just going to use the Bezier again, and then take a look at this, zoom into this a little bit more, and just press the tab key, just see what it's created for us here. We've just got this one spline with the 2 points either end, and it's just one of the splines has been rotated, one of the handles has been rotated just to give us this off-kilter look, and just to demonstrate the resolution of the interpolation between those 2 points there. But what we can do now is just go over some of the basic ways in which we can edit this curve. So what I'm going to do actually first is just take these handles. I'm just going to press V to set them to an automatic type, which sort of straightens them all out, just makes this process a little bit easier to demonstrate. If I now press the E key to just extrude, we can see we're actually just, oops, I've just pressed E again and left click to confirm that. And then we can see that it's just drawing that curve out, which is fine. We can then just maybe change the handle types to whatever we might like, or you know, just get into whatever we want and what we've already covered. If I just go and rotate out of that view for a second, we can see that it's just created it all flat, but we can actually just raise them up a little bit if we want. In fact, it's just going to create them at the angle of the viewing plane that we're at. So the camera is looking at it at this angle right now. So if we just continue to press E to extrude, we can see that it's actually just going to generate those points in parallel to the viewing plane that we were at there, if you can just make that out. So that might be why it's useful to draw things out from an orthographic point of view. But anyway, that's some of the basics of just extruding out and creating more detail with your curve. We can also choose to shift select a second point, so we've got 2 adjacent points selected there, and just subdivide between those, and that's just created this extra point in the middle. That's probably all we need to look at over just the basics of manipulating and editing the curves there. But we've got all these other options in here within the 3D views menu here, the header. We can see the curve menu, and then we've also got some options in the tool shelf that might be particularly commonly used. But if we actually just tab back into object mode, we can just see the curve without the handles there. It's quite straightforward. So let's just take a look at some of the options available to us within the properties. One of the most useful things, particularly for a Maya user, is the fact that how easy it is to just generate some thickness to this the curve, and then have it to be editable, renderable, should I say. And that's because in this geometry section we've got this offset and extrude and so on, but what we can do is we just take a look at this bevel. We can give it some bevel thickness there. And then if we just take a look at it, we can see it's actually just beveling it on just halfway at the moment. So if we just come up here and just fill the whole thing, just turn that to full, and ensure that we're on the 3D type here, because we're going off in the three dimensions. If we just press Z to toggle the wireframe, we can see the resolution of the of the geometry that it's now creating along this curve. And it's actually quite low. It's just almost the lowest that we can get. So if we actually just give that a little bit more resolution, we can see we're getting a much finer, much sharper sort of curve around a sort of a cable, or maybe some sort of you know, some kind of pipe of some kind. It's quite easy to then tab in and just carry on sort of manipulating and so on. So that's the basics there. We can also change the start and end factors of the bevel there. That's quite useful stuff. One of the other things that we can do actually is we can highlight one of the points along the curve and press Alt S to get into the shrink fatten, and that can allow us to give some noise and variation of detail along the curve there, just maybe make it a little bit more organic, depending on what you're trying to do, as I say. And we can also sort of taper the ends in if we want, should that be the sort of thing that we're looking at doing. But there's obviously other options there to taper the object and bevel the object using extra other curves. So those are very, very useful things to look at as well. But as I say, there's other things in here to look at, which is all very, very straightforward, and definitely worth experimenting. It's actually quite easy and straightforward, as I say, to be able to create curves in Blender. So that's definitely something worth looking into. Just one last thing before I sign off on this is just because if we just take a look at the properties, we can see we do get that radius in there added into the control points and so on. If we just press Alt S, we can see that the radius is changing there, so we can make exact settings with that shrink and fatten option. So that's just the basics of generating and editing curves within Blender. I hope that all makes sense. To transfer maps in Blender, we just need to come over to the Properties window, and in particular the Render tab. And we can see at the bottom here there's these bake settings, which is essentially giving us the control of what we want to bake and what we want to bake it to. We can see here we've got ambient occlusion set at the moment, or we could switch to normals or the alpha or any of these other settings really. But we'll just do a very simple ambient occlusion bake at the moment. And really just to demonstrate this, rather than transferring a map, we'll just bake onto this plane that we have selected. So I'm just going to tab into edit mode just to show the UVs. I've just split the main 3D view into two windows there, and this one's just UV/image editor now. And this is allowing us to visualize our images and the UVs. So we can see that we have these UVs, which are simple to generate with the U key in the 3D view, and then just click Unwrap. But now all I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a new texture, a new black texture called baking tests, and then click OK. And now we can see it's a little bit larger than the view there, so I'm just going to scroll out with the middle mouse button. So we can see that this black texture now in the background of our UVs, and if we're on ambient occlusion now, so I'm just going to select bake. And this is the result of our texture bake, which is potentially exactly what you would expect with this monkey head on the plane in the middle of it. You'll notice it's actually quite grainy, or at least if that comes through in the video, I hope that's noticeable. You can see it's quite grainy. I've set that quite low at the moment. If I come over to the world settings, we can see that we've got ambient occlusion switched on, and we can see the gather settings there, and in particular we've got the sample set to 5. So to crank that up to maybe about 12 would give us some nice smooth results without it taking too long, but we could just keep on cranking that up depending on the situation at hand. So I'm just going to come back over to the Render tab and back down to the baking settings, and now in particular we'll try and bake the normals of the monkey head onto this plane using the texture. So what we'll do is I'm just going to switch this to normals, and then basically what we're going to need to do is just make sure it's on tangent normals, and then use the selected to active. So it's basically just the monkey to the active polygon plane with the UVs on it. So I just shift selected that there. So now let's just bake that. And we can see we basically get that monkey head projected onto the plane. Unfortunately, we're getting the wrong end of the UVs. We're getting all the faces that are underneath the closest to the plane there. So to change that, what we would need to do is just use the bias, shift the bias above the head there. So a few units should just about do it. In fact, let's just crank that up to about 10 because it doesn't really matter. Click bake again, and then we can see that that's perhaps a bit more useful. So if we had that normal map applied to that plane now, it would appear from above that there was this geometry on top of it. And so that's basically just a very simple transfer maps within Blender.